Hello everyone, and welcome back for another Iceberg video. Today we're going to be looking at the Medieval Mysteries and Strange Events Iceberg made by user The True Science on Reddit. I'm sure you all know what an iceberg is if you clicked on this video. We will be looking at more known entries at the top, and as we work our way down, we will get to more obscure ones. The top of this iceberg has things on it that will be covered that are not mysteries or really strange events, but as we get further down, things will become more obscure. So without further ado, let's get into it and start Tier 1. Starting Tier 1, we have Flat Earth. Flat Earth, as it relates to the medieval times, is the common modern misconception that people during the Middle Ages and the medieval era all thought the Earth was flat. People have known the Earth was round for centuries, from the Venerable Bede, St. Thomas Aquinas, and back to the ancient Greeks and Hellenists. People of the medieval era knew the Earth was round, though what they did not know was what, if any, undiscovered lands lay out over the horizon. For the next entry, which, as said, is not a mystery or strange event, it can only really be described as, I guess, part of the medieval European world significant enough to include. But anyway, Islam is of course referring to the religion that was spread out of the Arabian Peninsula by Muhammad. The religion can be traced back to the 7th century, around 610 AD, when Muhammad claimed to have been visited by the angel Gabriel. And from there on out, the religion spread to much of the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and into Europe. The fall of Constantinople refers to the capture of the Byzantine city Constantinople by the Ottoman Turks on the 29th of May, 1453 AD, after a siege lasting just over 50 days. The city that was an imperial city of Rome lasted from 330 AD to 1453, only ever falling once before to the sacking of it in the Fourth Crusade in 1204. There is a story that an open gate allowed the Turks to bypass the immense and powerful defenses of the walls of Theodosius and allowed them to take the city. Many medieval historians will mark the fall of Constantinople as the end of the medieval age. The Black Death, or the bubonic plague, is a very well-known disease that caused the death of anywhere from 75 to 200 million people and anywhere from 1/3 to about 1/2 of Europe's total population from 1346 to 1353 AD. The plague was devastating to a world without antibiotics and ravaged people from Europe, but also killed people from North Africa all the way to the Mongols and Tartary. The disease caused by the bacteria Yersinia pestis goes down as the most deadly pandemic humanity has ever faced, and to this day, the disease is still around, though, at much fewer numbers. The Protestant Reformation started in the 16th century of Western and Central Europe and was a straying away of Christians from the papacy and the Catholic Church. Led by figures such as Martin Luther and John Calvin, it allowed for a more decentralized form of Christianity where there was no big centralized church body to decide matters relating to theology. Protestantism forms one of three big branches of Christianity, Catholic and Orthodox being the other two, though there are pre-Protestant, non-Catholic, or Orthodox denominations. And in Protestantism, there can be found many, many different denominations. The New World refers to the Americas, North and South America, that were discovered for Europe when Columbus reached the New World in his voyage of 1492, or, depending on who you ask, Leif Erikson's earlier voyages. Though Columbus did open up the New World for mass trade, settlement, and more. The New World was a huge shift in the ways of life when it was discovered and changed the course of human history for good. The Reconquest, or La Reconquista, refers to the Christians reclaiming the Iberian Peninsula from the Muslim invaders that arrived with the Umayyad Caliphate, beginning with the Battle of Covadonga around 718 or 22, and ending finally with the surrender of Granada in the south in 1492. The Reconquista potentially laid the groundwork, ambition, desire, and power that Spain, and also Portugal, was to have in the New World and the expansion of their empires over the globe. The Inquisition, or the Spanish Inquisition, was set up by the Church in Spain on November 1st, 1478 AD, initially to root out false or faked conversions from the Jews and the Moors/Muslims of Spain. Beginning near the end of the previous entry we discussed, the Reconquista, it lasted up into the 1800s of Spain, until 1834, focused only on the Old World and not the natives in the New, who were also newer Catholic converts. It had aims to root out heresy that was thought to be going on from the previously mentioned groups. Over the approximately 350 years that it went on, around 150,000 people were prosecuted, and of them, 3,000 to 5,000 people were executed. The Silk Road refers to the extensive trade routes that reached from the Orient in the east to the Middle East and Indian subcontinent, then further on into Europe. The Silk Road at times was a lawless and risky road, and at other times It was a safe and often traveled road with checkpoints, guards, etc. Typically, that was under Mongol rule. The Silk Road allowed for eastern and western goods to be traded long distances over the period of many weeks or months, and was typically faster over the expansive steppes of Central Asia than it was when it was in the west in Europe. The Hundred Years' War was a war that lasted a bit over 100 years actually, from 1337 to 1453, sometimes intermittently, between England and France. It started over essentially English claims to the throne of France and feuds over who was the rightful ruler of the kingdom. The war led to many advancements in technology when it comes to war. The war is usually broken up into 3 phases that the English were initially winning, but in the end, in 1453, it was the House of Valois that got the crown and technically won the 100 Years' War. The Crusades, as we mainly think of them, were conflicts and wars between the Arab and the Christian world for the control of Levant and the Holy Land, with cities like Jerusalem, Acre, and Antioch. There were multiple crusades, from the First to the Fourth, and from the People's to the Barons' Crusade. There were crusades against others and in other areas, but the popular notion that is thought of when crusades are mentioned are knights in the Holy Land fighting for control of Jerusalem. Vikings were Scandinavian seafaring people that from the 8th to the 11th centuries raided, ventured, and more all across much of the known world. They ventured from the North and the British Isles to Iceland and Greenland, all the way down into the Mediterranean and into the Middle East as well. Speaking Old Norse and worshipping pagan gods, they sometimes settled where they landed, sometimes looted and pillaged, and sometimes what they did is lost to history. Vikings and Norse people shaped a lot when it came to the Middle Ages and medieval Europe, and are cemented in popular culture today. Torture, from what I assume this entry is referring to, are the numerous and oftentimes very dark ways they would subject people to punishment for crimes or for the potential confession of crimes being investigated. There are multiple forms of medieval torture that are well known today, like quartering, which they would tie up the 4 main limbs and rip apart the victim, slowly or quickly. And another popular one, the Iron Maiden, was likely a more modern invention, though, that is common to think of. But overall, methods of extracting confessions or punishing people were pretty harsh back in the medieval era. The term Dark Ages is generally a term that describes the early medieval era that occurred just after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, or of the entirety of the Middle Ages as a whole. The term is in contrast to the seemingly light and relatively advanced age of classical antiquity before the fall of Rome. The term is not much used by scholars anymore, as it is generally wrong, and there were many scientific, cultural, theological, and more advancements made. Europe did see sort of a setback after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, but it was not solely a dark period of human history for over 1,000 years. Mongol invasions refers to a time around the 13th and 14th centuries where the Mongols swept across Central Asia and into Eastern Europe, conquering as they went. They conquered huge chunks of Russia, subjugated Georgia, and took over Hungary, and swept across Poland and into and around modern-day Germany and Austria. The Mongols on horseback were able to easily defeat the heavy mounted knights and infantry by feigning retreats and luring the Europeans into traps. The Mongols never got immense wealth from Europe, and left the continent mostly when the Khan Ogodai died, and there was much infighting. Feudalism was essentially how society was formed for much of medieval life and the era. It was a form of obligation that each social class was to perform and stick to as their way of life. The peasants and the lower classes were to provide the base, with food, military service, etc., and the upper classes were to provide protection and guidance. It was seen as a reciprocal relationship in the social classes for many. Feudalism is a newer term that is used to describe the way of life back in the era, and there's no real set definition. I'm sure many of you saw graphs in history class in middle and high school. Joan of Arc, a patron saint of France, was a French girl born into peasantry. During the 100 Years' War, she saw visions and was guided by divine grace and was to lead and become a rallying cry for the French cause in the war. Being sent by the French to the town of Orleans, which was under siege, she reinvigorated a demoralized French population, and just a few days later, the English siege was broken. Later, standing next to the king at his coronation, she was later part of an unsuccessful siege and was captured by Burgundians, allies of the English, where she was declared guilty of heresy and blasphemy and burned at the stake. Estamental society refers to how society was organized with essentially defined social classes. It is a Spanish word meaning literally a state, and basically it has the king or emperor at the top with people below him, such as nobles, the clergy, knights, peasants, and serfs. It's kind of similar to feudalism, which we talked about a couple entries ago too. For our last entry of Tier 1, we have the East-West Schism, or the Great Schism of 1054 AD. It's when the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church split apart from each other. Both churches claim to be the one true church as well, and the whole issue, to be super oversimplified, surrounds papal infallibility and supremacy, and where the Holy Spirit proceeds from, and more theological issues between the two churches. The split kind of separates Eastern Europe from the center and West, but today and over time there have been attempts to mend the schism and have both churches be in communion with each other. Starting tier 2 of the Iceberg, we have gunpowder, which I'm sure you all know what that is. It launches projectiles at high speeds from a device. It originated in China and the East, and from the 12 to 1300s it made its way to Europe and forever changed how warfare worked. Scholastic, or scholasticism, is the way in which medieval thinkers were to think about and solve issues relating to free will, reason and intellect, realism, and more, like the probability of God. They were also using Augustinian or Aristotelian methods to form their assertions. A goal of it was to attain the whole truth and figure out many questions posed. The great Christian thinkers of the era, like St. Thomas Aquinas and William of Ockham, were known scholastics, with St. Thomas's work Summa Theologica being basically the essential work and idea of scholasticism. Baby paintings refers to paintings of the child Christ that were done in the medieval era and where he looks to us, oddly older looking for a baby. The reason behind the older-looking baby Jesus and other biblical children is seemingly the idea of homunculus, or little man, where there's a thought Jesus was forever unchanging. The style changed and became out of fashion during the Renaissance, when babies and baby Jesus were painted as a more natural-looking baby. The Northern Crusades were crusades to Christianize the Northern European peoples, such as the Uralic peoples and the Baltic peoples. It was aimed to Catholicize them from their old pagan ways, and was a way to bring more people into the church. The Crusades took place in Sweden, the Baltic region, Prussia, and even the Slavic areas to an extent, as to get them away from orthodoxy. These crusades are often overlooked by the Middle Eastern ones, which are more known to us today. The Holy Roman Empire is a well-known European empire that began on Christmas Day 800 AD when Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne the Emperor of Rome, reviving the title after a couple of centuries. The empire lasted a very long while, sometimes strong and sometimes very weak, until the early 1800s when it fell due to Napoleon. If you say the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire, you look like the nerd emoji, and I am not sorry. Mansa Musa refers to the king of the Mali Empire and is often claimed to be potentially the richest man who ever lived. He ruled during the 1300s and is known for ruling during the largest extent of the Mali Empire and making a pilgrimage to Mecca, as he was a Muslim, and essentially showering gold everywhere he went. Much of what we know comes from Arabic accounts of his life and what he was like, and he has to do more with the Islamic medieval era than he does with the European. Vlad II Dracul, known as the father of the probably more famous Vlad the Impaler, Vlad II ruled as the Voivod of Wallachia 2 separate times during his life. I mentioned his son and Wallachia on the previous Iceberg I made if you want to check out this well. Yes, shameless plug, my apologies. But anyway, he ruled 2 distinct times and fought with the Ottomans and others many times as well. His reign ended when he died fleeing captivity, and his grave and place of burial is still debated on where exactly it is to this day. Medieval marginalia is referring to the writings and drawings that are in the margins of some medieval era texts, manuscripts, and books, usually done by students. Some marginalia is texts and written notes of commentary and thought that gives an insight into the lives and heads of medieval era people, and some, well, are just funny pictures and drawings that also provide insight and show that medieval people were also humorous and people too. The Children's Crusade was a crusade that was composed of, you guessed it, children and teenagers. The crusade cannot even really be called a crusade because it never was approved by the church or papacy and Pope Innocent III. The whole crusade is shrouded in confusion of reality and myth, but the gist of it is that some boys went around Europe preaching for the peaceful conversion of Muslims in and around Jerusalem. The boys and their 30,000 followers marched to the Mediterranean Sea thinking it would part and open at their arrival, but it never did. The kids decided to set sail on boats, and the story goes that they all either died in a shipwreck or that they were sold into slavery in Tunisia. The Norman Conquest was the conquest of the Kingdom of England by the Normans, led by William the Conqueror. The English, before the conquest, had been in conflict with the Norwegians and Harald Hardrada, but successfully defeated him. 3 days later, William the Conqueror and his thousands of allies landed in Sussex. The English marched south to meet William, and the English were being led by King Harold Godwinson, but at the Battle of Hastings, William and his forces defeated the English and killed King Harold, making William the king. There were rebellions after his ascension, but over time his rule became secure and the Normans adopted much of what the Anglo-Saxons were doing before. The Magna Carta is a charter of rights that King John of England signed in 1215 AD. It was drafted by an archbishop to mend the rift and bring together the monarchy and a group of rebellious nobles. It was a royal charter that was drafted to protect and ensure church rights, quick and speedy punishments, imprisonment issues, feudal concerns, and more. The document, which as of today is 808 years old, was an influential legal document for Western Europe and civilization. Even though none of the original 1215 statutes are in place anymore, and only 4 clauses of the 1297 version are, its influence cannot be denied. The Knights Templar, or the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, was a Catholic military order that was founded around 1119 AD by Bernard of Clairvaux and Hugues de Payens, who was the first Grand Master of the order. Closely tied to the Crusades, they were first formed to protect pilgrims from marauding bandits who would roam on the way into Jerusalem. At first, very broke, they rose to become rich, with thousands of members at one point, mostly non-combatant knights, and spanned not just around the Holy Land, but had chapters in mainland Europe, like in France, Spain, etc. The order was abolished after the French crown wanted them gone, and influencing the Pope as well. On Friday the 13th of 1307, many were arrested. The Pope waived their charges of heresy, though he formally disbanded them in 1312. The order, one among numerous other Catholic military orders, is the most well-known and the one with the most conspiracy theories and mysteries attached to it, from the stories of the Holy Grail and Holy Lance to Freemasonry. I'll potentially make a video in the future surrounding them and the mysteries with them or the Holy Grail. Their story is super interesting. For our last entry of Tier 2, we have UFOs and medieval paintings. Medieval UFO paintings are paintings where there seems to be either something unidentified in the sky, or there are things that look odd and comparable to how we view UFOs today. The pictures are seemingly odd, though, because a lot of them do look like what we think of with the UFOs, like the Baptism of Christ, which is not medieval but is a painting with a peculiar-looking phenomenon or object in the sky. There are more, like the Madonna with Saint Giovannino, where a blurry dark object seems to be portrayed. A lot of the paintings are seemingly biblical references painted with an artist's vision, though some are indeed a bit odd. Maybe some are of UFOs, but who really knows? Starting Tier 3, we have the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The Battle of Stamford Bridge was referenced in passing some entries ago when I mentioned the Norman invasion. The battle took place on the 25th of September 1066 AD, when the English forces led by Harold Godwinson defeated the Norwegian forces led by Harald Hardrada and the English king's brother Toste Godwinson. The invading Norwegian army was mostly decimated by the English, and Hardrada and Toste Godwinson were killed. The victory, which had high cost for both sides, was then followed up less than 3 weeks later by the invading Normans to the south, when King Godwinson fell and the Normans began their reign. The Spear of Destiny is referring to the Holy Lance. That was the lance that was used to pierce Jesus Christ's side during his crucifixion. After his death, to make sure Jesus was dead, a Roman soldier, Longinus, pierced his side and blood and water poured out. There were multiple claims of a true spear being found, like one that was found during the First Crusade, one that was lost during the French Revolution, and a few more. There was a story that whoever possessed and wielded it could mold the world into their vision, both good or bad. The Nuremberg celestial phenomenon of 1561 refers to when a multitude of UFOs were sighted above the free imperial city of Nuremberg, which was part of the Holy Roman Empire during the time. The story goes that around the dawn of the morning of April 14th, men and women saw what looked like to be an aerial battle around the sun. It was then followed by a large black pointed triangular object. Supposedly, hundreds of spheres and cylinders were also spotted, and they were all moving erratically. This event is the most famous of its kind, but there were numerous other recorded instances of UFOs in the sky during the era. There was no definitive reason for said celestial phenomenon, but there are explanations that are posited, like they could have been sundogs or even a case of mass hysteria, which we will talk about as we go further down the iceberg. The Roman Empire fell in 1453 is just referring to the fall of the Byzantine Empire, or the eastern half of the Roman Empire. It was a continuation of the Roman Empire after its counterpart, the western half, fell in 476 AD. The Byzantines never called themselves Byzantines, they called themselves Romans, and continued doing so even after it fell. and there's no real mystery here. It's just referring to the fall of the Byzantines. Anfim is the story of a young boy who lived in Russia sometime in the 13th century. He left his homework that was etched into soft birch bark, preserved in the Novgorod clay soil. His homework exercises were pictures of battle scenes and him with his teacher, and also he practiced his letters and symbols. The boy, Anfim, likely around 6 years old at the time of these etchings, left behind multiple pieces of homework. He left behind 17 works, 5 of only text and writing practice, and the rest a mixture of picture and also texts. The Arab slave trade refers to instances in which slavery and the trading of slaves was practiced by the Arabs. There were slave trades that went into sub-Saharan Africa to get slaves, and there were also slave raids on coastal cities of Europe that would capture Europeans, and also Asian-oriented slave trades as well. Slaves did different things depending on what part of Arab culture they were in and where they were located. They could be manual laborers all the way to trained soldiers. The slave trade eventually went away, though, after pressures from Western powers like Britain and France influenced it. The Index Liborum Probitarum was a list that was formed by the Catholic Church that was in play a little after the medieval era, originating from 1560. The index was a list of works that were deemed heretical by the Church, and it made Catholics banned from printing them or reading them as well. It contained books that were deemed heretical and writings from numerous people, and also contained versions of the Bible that were not Catholic. In 1966, it was removed in a legal sense. It's still a moral force that Catholics should be aware of and take note when and if they were to read something on it, though it is mostly forgotten nowadays. The dance epidemic of 1518, or the dancing plague, is a relatively well-known thing on the internet nowadays, but it was an illness of sorts that took place in Strasbourg, Alsace, in what is now modern-day France, but was then part of the Holy Roman Empire. It lasted from July of 1518 to September of the same year, and anywhere from a couple dozen to a couple hundred were said to be afflicted and would not stop dancing. Modern explanations attribute it to a fungus in the grain, mass hysteria, or some type of religious significance. Not much besides that can be summarized or detailed about this mini-plague that may or may not have been deadly. The Vinland map was a supposedly 15th century map of the world that described the Norse exploration of the world and most notably of North America. The map has been proven to be a forgery, though, that was produced in the 1900s. There was a team at Yale who acquired the map, and they were able to run tests on the ink showing it was not traditional ink that was used, that the writing did not make sense the way it was folded, and so on. The map, which was once thought to be an amazing pre-Columbian find, turned out to be a hoax. The War of the Bucket was a conflict between two city-states of Italy, Bologna and Modena. One city-state supported the papacy, and the other was more inclined to the Holy Roman Empire. In 1325, the Battle of Zepolino, the only battle of this war for the bucket, took place. The battle ended in a Modenese victory and a defeat for the city-state of Bologna. The war, which is thought to be caused by the stealing of the bucket, is probably wrong, and the bucket was likely just taken as a trophy after the battle. Typography press, from what I can assume, is referencing the invention, or more so adaptation in Europe, of movable printing press style type. Invented by Johannes Gutenberg, it allowed for much faster production of books, works, etc., and played a part in wider distribution of literacy for more of the public during that time. The average person could get by somewhat in their native tongue and could read it a bit, but with the invention and adoption of the printing press throughout Europe, it paved the way for modern literacy and literature as we know it. The disease of kings, or more today commonly known as gout, is a form of arthritis that affected the nobility semi-regularly in medieval times. The causes are due to lifestyle and in part diet, and is just a crystallization of uric acid in the joints. The disease has affected kings since ancient times, and it was noted by people such as Hippocrates. Gout, or the disease of kings, is a relatively common thing in the history books, but is also becoming more common in the general population due to sedentary lifestyles. For our last entry on Tier 3, we have the Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin, or the Holy Shroud, is said to be the fabric that was laid over Jesus Christ when he was laid to rest in the tomb before coming back 3 days later. The linen possesses a miraculous imprint on it that depicts Jesus. In the negative pictures of the shroud, it is much more discernible. The authenticity of the shroud has been debated among scholars and the Catholic Church as well since its discovery, and it has been said to be real and authentic multiple times, but also has said to be an ingenious forgery made by man. There are theories such as radiation being the cause of the image and more, but not a definitive scientific explanation is met with 100% approval. Beginning Tier 4, we have ANCAP Iceland, or Anarcho-Capitalist Iceland. ANCAP Iceland is, from what I can tell, referring to the Commonwealth of Iceland, which was also covered on my Empire Iceberg video I made. The Commonwealth was the island of Iceland as it existed from the 10th to the 13th centuries approximately. before it swore fealty to Norway. The Commonwealth, made up of regions of the island controlled by chieftains, would essentially be autonomous from each other and would meet up to discuss laws and legal disputes at the Althing, essentially a national assembly. There was no executive body of government to enforce the legal code, and therefore Iceland at this time was stateless, and that is where we get ANCAP Iceland. The Voynich manuscript is an illustrated, supposedly medieval codex that was written in an unknown script known as Voynichese. The codex's paper was dated to the medieval era, though. Beyond that, not much is known about where it comes from. The manuscript, that is still undeciphered to this day, contains 240 pages of detail, though some pages are thought to be missing, of writing from left to right, fictitious fake plants, and astrological symbols. The codex is named after a Polish book dealer who purchased it in 1912, Wilfrid Voynich. Yale now possesses the codex and made it readable online in 2020. I highly recommend the video about this manuscript called The Voynich Manuscript by the Histocrat. I cannot do it justice here in this short Iceberg, so I recommend that video fully. The Cerne Abbas giant refers to a work done in the south of England in Dorset depicting a giant male engraved into the hillside. The giant has a club in his hand and is depicted nude, so I'm obviously not showing the full image, but it is not definitive where it comes from, and there's evidence it has been altered or changed a bit over the years, with the first written account dating to the 1600s, though scientific dating using radiation has suggested it to be from 700 to possibly 1100 AD. There is another giant figure in England known as the Long Man of Wilmington who is close by, but is shown to be made more recently and has decidedly less detail than the giant. The Iron Crown of Lombardy is a votive crown, one which is usually smaller and hangs from chains, that was said to be made for the Roman Emperor Constantine, and that also contains a nail that was used in the crucifixion of Christ. Not much is really known about the crown other than it uses an iron band on the inside of it that is said to be the nail, and it was used for coronations of kings. It is now housed in the Cathedral of Monza in Italy. The Waldenses and the Cathars refers to two distinct things. First, the Waldenses or the Waldensians were a heretical form of Christianity that were around the French Alps formed by Peter Waldo. The sect stressed poverty and asceticism as the way to heaven. They were deemed heretical not due to beliefs per se, but because they would not acknowledge the local bishops basically guiding them in their preaching. They later became part of Calvinism. Second, Cathars were also a heretical sect of Christians that were mainly around northern Italy and southern Europe. They were a Gnostic movement that believed in two gods, one good and one evil, and this was not monotheistic according to the Catholic Church. The good God was the one of the New Testament, and the bad the one of the Old. The Nicene Creed contradicted this belief and asserted there was only one God. Today it's debated if they were as widespread or believed as is said, or if it was an exaggeration from the Church, though the Church did suppress the movement and it did eventually die out. Psychedelic sacred art, from what I can assume, is sacred or holy Christian art that was formed and made under the influence of psychedelics or made as a result of what was seen under the use of said psychedelics. It's a modern idea and retroactively applied to Christian theology as an attempt to explain things. It could also be applied in other areas too, I'd assume, though there's not much info about this that I could even find. It's probably known to all Joe Rogan listeners, I would presume, like the story of the burning bush and all that. Urine was a medicine is referring to how urine during the medieval era was said to be an indicator and a telling sign of what your health was like. During the era, urine as a medical tool was used by Western Europe, Eastern, Byzantine, and also the Arabs. Uroscopy and using a thing called the urine wheel was able to indicate to medieval doctors through the color, smell, apparently even taste too, in some instances, what your health was like. A 17th century English doctor, Thomas Willis, described the urine of a diabetic patient as sweet like honey or sugar. Over time, the practice of using urine changed to chemical analysis over the taste and smell, though things like the color can still be indicators of certain things. A bestiary is a compendium and collection of animals that is accompanied by texts describing the animal, habitats, and even in some cases, the lesson an animal can teach the reader. Bestiaries also frequently contain accounts and stories of mythical animals like unicorns and dragons, and they compiled their information from other sources and secondary accounts. They were compilations of accounts made by people who said they encountered the animals, travelers, or just animals that were in popular myth and culture, and their stories that were shared. They were popular for centuries, and up to today they are popular in different forms as well. The phantom time hypothesis is a conspiracy that was developed in the 1980s and 90s that claims large parts of human history are fabricated and that we are being lied to about events that may or may not have happened in the past. The theory also asserts that Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, Pope Sylvester II, and potentially Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII lied about the years 614 to 911 to legitimize Otto III being the emperor, specifically at the year 1000 AD. The entire Carolingian period, the period that includes Charlemagne, was apparently made up by those individuals as a fake story to legitimize claims. Robert Illig, the originator of the theory, continued to write about it until 2013, but today the theory is largely rejected by most everyone, and scholars do not take the argument seriously as there is ample evidence to refute the theory. Manicule is just a feature that appears in texts even to this day. It is a little arrow or indicator in the margin or next to the text that highlights a section of importance. It is more common in the days of old in medieval margins and manuscripts. Displayed as a drawn hand often, it can be used to start margin notes. It is similar to marginalia that we discussed a few years up as well. Oftentimes, the manicules were drawn humorously and help explain the minds of medieval scribes. Greek fire recipe refers to that we have no written accounts of how the famous Byzantine Greek fire was once made. The Greek fire that was able to be used to great effect by the navy of the Byzantines was likely made with some sort of combination of naphtha or crude oil and quicklime and was able to burn on the water's surface. Today, it is possible to make substances that burn on the top of the water. We just don't know the chemical makeup of the Greek fire that was once used, and we can only hypothesize. The disappearance of Owain Glyndŵr is referring to a Welsh leader who led a 15-year-long revolt against the English rule of Wales. The story of the disappearance starts with a dispute he had with a nearby English noble, which led him declaring himself Prince of Wales. The revolt that spawned from this led to the English enacting laws against the Welsh, and Welsh support for the new Prince Owain growing. Eventually, winning enough battles, he gained brief independence and was recognized by envoys from other countries like Spain, France, Scotland, and more. The English, a few years later, were able to capture his last remaining strongholds, though, and then Owain fled to the Welsh hills to never be seen or heard from again. The last entry of Tier 4 is the disappearance of Giovanni Caboto, or anglicized to John Cabot and his crew, and refers to the disappearance that he and his crew faced when they were last seen in May of 1498. Cabot is notable for being an early explorer that explored northern Canada after the Norse left the area earlier on. His disappearance is shrouded in mystery because little is known. It is often said to be that he and his crew faced shipwreck on the sea and they all perished, but the mystery comes in because one of the crew's members was recorded to be alive in London in 1501, his name being Lancelot Thurkill. There are many theories to what happened: shipwreck, him dying during his last voyage, returning to England and dying peacefully in private, and even a theory that he stayed in the Americas with a few people and Catholic friars who founded a mission in Canada to teach the natives of Christianity. There is much that is not known about the explorer, and mystery will forever surround him. Starting Tier 5, we have the tomb of Genghis Khan. The tomb of the Great Khan is unknown and forgotten to history. There is a famous, probably untrue story that when he was buried, the people doing the burial were killed, and then the people who killed them were killed as well, so the location was completely forgotten. The general region where he was buried is known though, just not the exact spot, and the region was guarded by the descendants of the Khan, and then later on was under control by the USSR, who used the area for military practice. The area is now covered in debris and craters from missile tests in the area, and the tomb of Genghis Khan is totally forgotten, except maybe it is known to a few monks, though no one knows for sure. The book Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World by Jack Weatherford does a good job describing the location of the burial. I recommend the book if you want a fairly good book about the Mongols as well. The Temple of Kukulkan, or El Castillo, the castle in English, in the Mesoamerican city of Chichen Itza is a Mesoamerican pyramid that was constructed in the medieval era, though that era is not really applicable to the New World, but it was built anywhere from the 700s to the 1100s. It was built by the Mayans as a temple to Kukulkan, a deity that very closely resembles the Aztecs' Quetzalcoatl. There's a theory that when clapping near the pyramid, the echoes will mimic that of a Quetzal bird. There's also a pattern that appears on the pyramid of a serpent near the spring and fall equinoxes. All in all, the pyramid is surrounded by interesting mysteries. Tarasque, I think it's pronounced, is a mythical French creature that is said to have the head of a lion, the shell of a turtle, 6 bare legs, a serpent's tail, and poison breath. Not all the depictions conform to those traits, but they all are sort of similar, and they all are associated with Saint Martha triumphing over the beast and freeing a person from its mouth. There are theories that its origin stems from Celtic legend and stemming from a similar story of a dragon creature called the Grauli, but no definitive source. All in all, it's just a French legend that tells a story of a saint triumphing over a beast. The disappearance of al-Hakim bi-Amr Allah refers to, of course, the vanishing of the sixth caliph of the Fatimid Empire. He is known as the Nero of Egypt and was frequently using brutal methods and killings on a whim when he wanted, though by some he is also viewed as divinely ordained. In the final years of his reign, he withdrew for prayer regularly, growing apart from many. One night, when retreating to the hills outside Cairo for prayer, he vanished. A search was launched and found only his horse and bloody garments. Some say his sister had him taken care of, but nothing is certain, and his death is still and will forever be a mystery. The Codex Gigas, or the Devil's Bible, is a giant codex or book that is the largest extant medieval manuscript we have, and includes a Latin Catholic Bible, works by Josephus, medical works, and much more. The book is known by its name due to a giant depiction of Satan that it contains, and also the legend surrounding the book. The legend goes that it was written by Herman the Recluse, a Benedictine monk who was condemned to be walled up alive for breaking monastic vows. However, he pleaded to the abbot that he could write a book in one night that contained all earthly knowledge. While writing the book, he realized at midnight he couldn't finish it, so he made a deal with the devil, and the book was then finished. Studies to see how long the book would have taken to write determined to write it with none of the drawings would have taken at least 20 years. With the drawings, significantly more. There is evidence to suggest it was written by a single person as well. Truthfully, the history about it is still debated. Offa's gold dinar is referring to one of 3 gold coins that remained from King Offa's of Mercia's reign. Offa reigned from 757 to 796, and the gold dinar that was minted during his reign is a copy of an Abbasid coin minted in 774. One side of the coin says Offa Rex, saying he is the king, and the other side, with the Arabic, shows it as a copy because the minter had little clue of Arabic as it contains grammatical errors and makes little sense. The coin could have been part of yearly payment to the church or a trade coin meant to be for Muslim Spain. Besides those details, not much is known about the coin or where exactly it came from. The Drolactic Dreams of Pantagruel is a woodcut picture book that was published in France by Richard Breton in 1565. Breton was the publisher, but the illustrator is unknown, but is thought to be François Desprez. The word drolatic in the title essentially means humorous. The figures are characters of the dreams of the giant Pantagruel, a giant from a story by François Rabelais, and from the final works of Rabelais. Nothing else is really notable except it was also big in England later on, but is probably included because today it can seem kind of creepy to modern audiences, and today it is thought to depict demons also. The Walls of Benin, also known as the Benin Moat, was built by the Edo people in the 1200s in Benin, Nigeria. The work began around 800 AD, and some surrounding work finished and lasted almost until 1500 AD. The moat or walls were acknowledged to be the second biggest man-made structure by length, second only to the Great Wall of China. The walls were damaged over time, and a lot of them are in ruin today, but their legacy still lives on. They were built probably for defense and boundary purposes for the city of Benin City. Monk's haircut is referring to tonsure, the practice of shaving part of the head or all of it in a form of religious devotion. It was and is commonly found in Roman Catholicism. It is still practiced by some religious orders under papal permission too. Today, largely the practice is obsolete, though it can still be found by some in Catholicism wearing the zucchetto, such as the Pope, cardinals, and bishops. There are also other religions that practice some form of tonsure, but is associated with Catholics frequently. Kajiki refers to an early Japanese chronicle covering numerous aspects of Japan and the island, stories about its myths, legends, emperors, etc. The chronicle is a way to unite more of the island with the Yamato imperial dynasty and legitimize them, and also helps form some key factors in the Shinto religion. The Kajiki, which is broken into 3 volumes, is partially written using Chinese characters, which are pronounced phonetically as a way to convey the Japanese language. The chronicles were important to Japanese identity, and still are to some extent today. Medieval underwear refers just to the type of underwear that was worn during the medieval era. Typically what was worn was loose-fitting garments that would go, of course, under the outerwear, called braes and undertunics. We unsurprisingly have more depictions of men's than women's from this age, but as opposed to men wearing what we mentioned, for underwear, women typically wore loose-fitting and flowing garments under their main outwear. I can only assume this entry is on the list because typically one does not really think about underwear when thinking about the era as a whole. Blood rain was rain that was thought to be blood and a sign or warning of bad omens. Blood rain is mentioned all the way back into antiquity in Homer's Iliad. Today, scientists most often say that it was the result of an algae that would turn the rainwater that distinct bloody color. There are many accounts of blood rain dating from before and during Livy and Pliny and all the way up to modern times. The modern routes take a different view than the views of old. The blood, which was once thought to be a bad omen and a warning of disaster, is today dismissed and is not even really blood. American Civilizations is talking about how there were civilizations in the New World and the Americas during the era of the medieval period. Notably, the Mayans were a civilization in the Americas before European contact, along with the Incas and the Aztecs. The cultures and civilizations were able to grow to large populations and have giant cities. This entry could also refer to lost civilizations that were things of legend, like El Dorado and Prince Madoc of Wales and the Welsh-speaking natives of the Americas. There were undoubtedly large and numerous civilizations during pre-Columbian North and South America. The Mouth of Hell, or Hellmouth, originally began as an Anglo-Saxon story that depicts the entrance to hell as the gaping mouth of a terrible monster. The depiction of the gates to hell were soon after popular across Europe and were even used past the medieval age and up into the Renaissance too. There is some confusion among those who equate the Hellmouth and the entrance to hell with the mouth of Satan who eats the damned, but these are not the same. The Hellmouth just refers to the gates of hell, essentially, and was depicted as a monster for dramatizing effect in old medieval art and also in plays and live shows of the period. Damascus steel, which is our last entry of Tier 5, is just referring to a type of steel that makes up typically swords and other bladed weapons and comes from the Near East. Blades made up of this steel were said to just be generally better than typical steel swords because it had better edges, was more resistant to wear, and less prone to shattering. It is commonly said that we have lost the technique to make weapons of this steel, though there have been numerous recorded successes by smiths able to make swords and blades with the same pattern as Damascus steel, though the methods used to recreate them in the makeup of the blades are still in contention, so we may or may not have actually cracked the code. Starting Tier 6, we have the splitting of the moon. This splitting was said to be a miracle that was attributed with the Muslims' prophet, Muhammad. According to Islamic tradition, this event occurred as a miraculous sign given by Allah to Prophet Muhammad to authenticate his prophethood and to serve as a warning to the disbelievers of the impending day of judgment. There is seemingly some debate amongst different denominations within Islam. Some see it as a literal event that happened, while others see it as more of a symbolic story and event. The Book of Miracles is an illuminated manuscript that was made in Augsburg, Germany in the 1500s. The manuscript, which the author is mostly a mystery that is debated among scholars on who it really is filled with 123 folios and some inserts. There are drawings of biblical scenes like the deluge or the flood, and more, like up to Revelation. The book has no title page or really anything else of the sorts, like a list of contents. Instead, the first page is straight into the illustrations. Recently, some pages have been re-identified, and to date it, there is art of a hailstorm in the Netherlands during 1552. A lot of this book is vague and a mystery, and there's not much to really talk about on it. Piri-Reis map was a map that was made in 1513 by the Ottoman cartographer and admiral Piri-Reis. There is only 1/3 of the western part of the world that survives. Some claim that the map quite noticeably depicts parts of South America that were not yet discovered and adds the idea of Terra Australis to the map, a landmass which is not Oceania, but an old thought that land existed in the south that balanced the weight of the land in the north. Also, there are theories that it depicts Antarctica, which was not officially discovered until the 1800s. Though it is largely rejected that this is what it is depicting and is instead said to be essentially inferred landmass, the map carries a lot of mystery with it and is genuinely interesting to look into more. The theories from it are very entertaining to learn about as well. Peter Neers was a convicted serial killer and murderer in Germany in the 1500s. Under torture, he confessed to have killed 544 people, which included supposedly 24 preborn children that he would cut out of pregnant women to use in black magic rituals. He was a leading figure in a group of killers and robbers that would roam the countryside of the Holy Roman Empire looking for victims, money, etc. He was supposedly able to transform himself into objects like rocks and wood, but was also said to be able to become a goat, cat, or dog as well. After escaping and running from the law, his face became decently known. He checked into an inn and went to bathe, but while doing so, inn residents noticed it was him and opened his supposedly magic bag and found heads and hearts from dead fetuses. Confronted by the people, he admitted it was him and he was apprehended and then killed after confessing to his crimes. The Green Children of Woolpit refers to an incident that happened in 12th century England. Reportedly, two children that were brother and sister randomly appeared one day in the village of Woolpit, which is in Suffolk, England. The two children apparently spoke an unknown language and would only eat uncooked fava beans, though eventually they did eat other food and became normal colored instead of green. While adjusting to their new lives, they were baptized, but the boy became sick and died. The girl became rude and not caring for authority. Eventually, after learning English, though, the girl explained where they had come from. They had come from a far-off land where the sun never shone. Everything was twilight all the time. There are theories it is a folk tale, or that the kids were from Flemish parents, though no one can be totally sure. The Great Famine of 1315 is referring to a huge, deadly, and widespread famine that affected most of Europe from 1315 to 1317. The famine was caused by bad weather and bad crop yield and led to the death of many from Poland in the east, England in the west, and also to the north and south of Europe up to the Alps. The famine marks an abrupt end to the time of remarkably good harvests and growth from the 11th to the 13th centuries. Death, disease, infanticide, and in some instances, cannibalism was widespread. The Great Famine impacted a lot from everyday life of people in the church, and to that, it also impacted how future famines were handled, such as ones in the 14th century and beyond. Outlaws, I assume, sort of relates to Pioneers and others of the sort, like highwaymen and roaming brigands that would rob and steal and evade the law and justice of kings. Outlaws were literally put outside the law as a consequence of their actions. People could kill, steal from, and basically do whatever they wanted to them and not face any legal consequences. Outlaws typically were men, and being an outlaw led a harsh life and was one of the most severe things a person could experience. The Six Kings of Earth refers to what I can only assume is the painting of the Six Kings, a fresco that is located in the Qasr Amra, a desert castle from the Umayyad Caliphate located in modern-day Jordan. The painting, now heavily damaged, depicts 6 kings in 2 rows of 3. 4 of the kings have been ID'd, a king of Byzantium, King Roderick of Spain, a Sassanid Emperor Khosrow, and a king of Aksum, Nahashi. The other 2 are unknown, perhaps due to the damage. There is speculation that the other 2 kings are either a Chinese emperor, a Turkic emperor, or a king of India. The painting, which was made in the 700s, barely survives today, and it is unknown if the other 2 identities will ever be known. Medieval football is a more modern term that is meant to refer to a wide variety of football-type games that were played and originated in England during the Middle Ages. These medieval games were different from modern-day games and had fewer rules than we have today, and they were seemingly more chaotic. These old forms of football would be played before the Lenten season with potentially unlimited players on each side. Medieval football is just referring to what evolved into modern football played today, or other ball games that may have gone mostly extinct and only survive in the historical records. The Princes of the Tower refers to the mystery of the fate of the deposed Edward V of England and his younger brother Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York, heirs to King Edward IV. The 12 and 9-year-old brothers were living in the Tower of London, put there by Richard, Duke of Gloucester, their uncle. Before Edward V could be crowned, he was declared illegitimate, and Richard took the throne as Richard III. The fate of the boys is unknown, though they were likely murdered, and in 1674, 2 workmen in the Tower of London uncovered a wooden box under a staircase 10 feet down, containing 2 small human skeletons. The skeletons were examined in the 1930s and could potentially be the princes. The skeletons, once discovered by the workmen, though, were moved to Westminster Abbey under orders from Charles II. There is another story, though, that could be about the princes. Workmen in the 1700s at St. George's Chapel accidentally broke into the vault of Edward IV and his queen and found an adjoining vault with 2 small skeletons. These were not investigated, though, and the tomb was resealed, though King Charles III could maybe be interested. Machu Picchu is an ancient Incan citadel that is located in the Andes Mountains in Peru. Likely built in the 1400s by Emperor of the Incas Pachacuti, it was lost over time and was only known about again in 1911 when Hiram Bingham rediscovered the lost citadel. The citadel served as a likely religious, ceremonial, and residential retreat for the emperor and other Incan nobles. Today, it is one of the most popular archaeological destinations that is visited by millions every year. The Berkeley Witch was a medieval story in England that told of a woman from Gloucestershire who sold her soul to the devil for immense wealth and riches. After she was told of her demise from her pet bird, she told her family how to watch over her grave and keep her from hell. Her family chained her grave shut and was to keep watch over her for 3 nights. Each night, though, demons came and broke the chains. and on the third night she was carried off to hell by the devil, who appeared and set her on a black horse covered in hooks. The only thing she left behind was the sounds of her screams as she was being dragged down to hell. For the final entry of Tier 6, we have the disappearance of the Norsemen from Greenland. The Norsemen, or the Vikings, landed in Greenland in the late 900s and were able to build relatively stable settlements there for hundreds of years. Then, they up and vanished sometime in the 1400s. There is no definitive reason as to why they left either. There are theories that the Norsemen, who never numbered much past a couple thousands in the territory, vanished due to Basque pirates and whalers in the region, the Black Plague impacting supplies getting to the land, and to the mini ice age that lowered Earth's temperatures for hundreds of years. Today, no one really knows the true fate of the Norsemen, and we can only speculate. Starting our final tier, Tier 7, we have Rainwig, the lost kingdom that existed in southern Wales. The name of this kingdom is never spelt consistently, the exact location and area changes, and more obscurity surrounds this whole kingdom. The story starts in the 17th century when a baron releases his library and it's able to be studied. There we have the first mention of this kingdom. In other texts, the kingdom is mentioned, but briefly, and never with much insight besides the occasional mention of King Alpha invading the country or the like. The Lost Kingdom still remains a mystery, and a rather unknown one at that. This Iceberg cannot do this entry justice, so if you are interested, check out the video by Cambrian Chronicles on YouTube titled The Mysterious Story of a Missing Medieval Kingdom. I highly recommend it. Muramasa refers to a swordsmith and his story who existed in Japan during the medieval era. The maker of fine swords and katanas became something of a symbol of anti-Tokugawa sentiment during the Edo era of Japan, which we talked about in my last Iceberg. Another feature of these swords is that they became known as wicked or demonic and would influence their owners to commit acts of horrific violence. It was also told that once these swords were drawn from their scabbards, they had to draw blood from a victim before being returned. The head of Saint Edmund, or of Saint Edmund the Martyr, is the story of a king of East Anglia whose head was able to speak after it was severed. The story goes that the king and future saint died a valiant martyr's death, and his head was then thrown into a nearby forest. When his men and followers went searching for it, they were calling out his name in hopes of a response. Miraculously, the head called back, and the men were able to recover it. They found the head being guarded by a wolf and protected from other animals. Edmund, who was the patron saint of England until 1350, was partially remembered by this fantastical event. Three-headed paintings, from what I can tell, are depictions of the Holy Trinity in art where the three heads are shown, the Father and the Son, along with the Holy Spirit. Though the Holy Spirit is usually depicted as a dove with outstretched wings, the Spirit as a person is not entirely uncommon in older art. God the Father is usually depicted as an older man in the center, and God the Son at the right hand of the Father as a younger man. The Holy Spirit is usually left up to the artist's interpretation and sits on the left of the Father. In paintings, sometimes there are also seemingly three identical figures as well. These depictions are typically more rare than the Holy Spirit being depicted as a dove, and they seem to have fallen out of fashion. Coedia is European sorcery or witchcraft that is passed down in spell books and tells how to perform the spells. The history of the word can be traced back to Greek and implies low magic or deceptive, harmful, or dangerous. This sorcery received sort of revival recently after it was dismissed and discarded by much of Europe as fake nonsense. It was revived by people such as Aleister Crowley and Eliphas Levi, and it also saw some attention with the witch hunts in the Americas and parts of mostly Protestant Europe as well. The Chronicle of Thietmar refers to a bishop that existed in the Holy Roman Empire in the late 900s and early 1000s AD. He chronicled the lives of medieval kings in the empire, including Otto III, which I assume this chronicle entry on the Iceberg is here for. I assume it relates to the phantom time hypothesis and the forgery of fake dates by Otto. And today the chronicle exists in a damaged state due to the firebombing of Dresden by the Allies in World War II, but there was a complete copy made in the early 1900s. Other than playing a potential role in explaining the time hypothesis, it is a great source for the history of Saxony and the reigns of multiple kings. Rudolphus Glaber refers to an 11th century Benedictine chronicler who traveled a lot and wrote important and useful historical documents in France and Italy. He wrote about the styles and how a lot of church architecture took inspiration from older styles or styles around them, and built and influenced each other. His works, while not entirely chronological, are still useful in descriptions and helped us know what life and belief was like during the turn of the first millennium. I am unsure if this plays a part in the theory about the millennial reign of Christ, which is an interesting theory to say the least, but his chronicles are important to historians today. The entry, Marco Polo was not the first, is talking about that he was not the first man to make his way to China and return. He was not the first European to travel all the way to China, but he was the first to have widespread acknowledgement of it and to have documented much of his time in the East. Before he went to the East to meet the Khan, his father and uncle were out East and met the Khan before he did. John of Plano Carpini, a Catholic archbishop for example, was before Marco by a good margin and was the first European to attempt to chronicle Mongol history. He visited the Great Khan and explained Catholic theology, but to no lasting avail. There were also Roman accounts and Chinese accounts of interactions between the Romans and Chinese, and Marco Polo definitely was not the first Westerner to venture to the Orient, but he was the most popular and his story was the first widespread and hugely documented one. His story is immensely interesting to read about from his travels as well. Medieval found footage, which it says to not research, but of course I had to anyway, refers to either an alternate reality game, or ARG, of videos depicting medieval times, or it could also refer to potential theories about time travel and people going back in time and recording the era. From Reddit, I was able to find a comment from a deleted user saying it's from a creepypasta about a story that takes place in the 50s or 60s of people exploring a castle and somehow blood drips on a stone and showed a lady being executed. From what I can tell, this entry is mostly a joke, and the do not research part is also a joke. If it's not a joke, I would appreciate a comment explaining what it is or comments expounding on what it could potentially be. For our very last entry on the Iceberg, we have the Banquet of Chestnuts, which, side note, is in purple on the Iceberg, which I can only assume means it's the last one to be covered. But anyway, this supposed Banquet of Chestnuts was a banquet or giant dinner that was held in the Papal Palace in Rome by a cardinal that was part of the Borgia family. It purportedly was full of debauchery, orgiastic behavior. The banquet was held in Cesare Borgia's apartments, yes, the person from Machiavelli's The Prince, and there were chestnuts strewn about the ground for the naked members to pick up, and the people who could perform the most sexual acts were to win awards. The authenticity of this story is challenged by many. A Vatican researcher outright denied that it happened, though others have been more detailed in their dismissals of the event, which was recorded by a single source, potentially prone to exaggeration. It is a relatively common story that is told, but truthfully, there is no definitive answer if it truly happened or not. The banquet lives on, though, as a story of what the medieval era was capable of producing. I just want to say thank you if you watched the video to the end. It means a lot to me. Also, thank you all for the support on the last video. When I saw it past 1,000 views, my stomach literally dropped, and now it's at over 50,000, which is absolutely insane. I appreciate the new subscribers and the likes too, and if you want to like and subscribe, I would appreciate it, though, again, totally up to you. I hope this video is better produced than my first Iceberg as well. I tried taking into account the comments that mentioned mic quality, music, and all that, and tried to improve them. I hope to make more videos like this in the future, though not necessarily always icebergs, but also theories, perhaps like that millennial reign of Christ theory which I covered, which, to say the least, is very interesting. That about does it. And I will hopefully have another video out sooner rather than later, and if I got anything wrong again, please feel free to correct me. I'd appreciate that. And one last time, I truly thank you all for the support. Have a great day, and goodbye.